I think my presentation fits really well after Julie and Susie's presentation, because once you have identified the units that they're potentially at risk of overheating, then then what I'm going to try and do is summarize the tools that you have at your disposal as a designer to actually test mitigation options. I'm going to start with a slide on the new climate projections. Those were released last November, and they give you an indication of how humanity is going to self-destruct, basically. There is a lot of information. Some highlights that they might be quite useful is comparing the extreme event that we had, the extreme summer that we have during 2018 to the future. So you can see in this slide that while it used to be a 1 in 10 events, 1 in 10 summers, by the 2050s, we are looking at every other summer. By the end of the century, this might be a common summer. And that raises the question, so what then would be an extreme event? So awareness on overheating has been increasingly raised over the last few years. The Zero Carbon Hub did a massive review, which was really useful for the industry, for policy, and also created quite a lot of, as I said, awareness on the potential risks of overheating. There was a really lucky event, lucky and unlucky, last year, where the Environmental Audit Committee released the heat waves report on how the UK is or not resilient and ready for climate change, for heat waves. And that happened on the hottest day of the year, last year. So the people that we have been talking for quite a long time about overheating, you can see myself and Julie there, we got our 5 minutes of fame talking about what we've always said, that this is potentially a really important issue, that it needs to be incorporated into policy, national policy and local policy as well. So why all of a sudden overheating is a problem? And one aspect is obviously climate change. An urban heat island effect, like Richard described. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but also is the way we design our spaces. They become smaller to fit more people in, and larger glazing areas to make the most of the winter sun and also the views outside. We create a lot of airtight environments, again, for winter energy efficiency, and potentially problems with insulation and ventilation just exacerbate the problem of overheating. Homes are particularly vulnerable because most of our homes are reliant on passive measures to deal with overheating. And perhaps traditional architecture was a bit more robust in that sense, but we have been designing more glass, more, I see some people laughing. I don't know if you are identifying the buildings that you have designed. Yeah, so yeah, people love the views and the glass and all that, but there is little understanding of how that has impact on the summer performance of the buildings. We rely again a lot on ventilation, but when you're designing these kind of buildings within an urban environment, the noise and pollution might mean that you won't be able to rely on that natural ventilation. So overheating, there has been a lot of debate. What is overheating? How do we define it? Endless discussions. Because everybody's experiencing overheating in a different way, based on the physiology, psychology, environment, control on their environment. We know for sure that temperatures above 35 degrees means that your body starts having problems. You are at risk of heat stress. And there is limited research that shows that during nighttime, if it's above 26 degrees, then you might have problems sleeping as well. So going into technical guidance, over the last few years, the industry has been using what we call an adaptive method. So that means that based on the weather that you have been experiencing the previous days, your physiology adapts to higher temperatures. And you can see in the graph that shows that kind of effect. So CIBSE, the institution that I'm working for, has published this, what we call technical memorandum, that describes what the adaptive comfort is and how it should be used when you're designing buildings. So some of us, also in the room, we tried to create, based on this adaptive comfort, a protocol, a design protocol to be used in homes. So we used the first criterion of the adaptive comfort, the TM52 methodology, and also we incorporated the 26 degrees of sleep impairment during the night. Now this protocol, the key, the basic use of it is to give you a baseline, so everybody uses the same assumptions when they are simulating, they're designing a property. And then you have this baseline, let's call it the worst case scenario, and you add on top of it your mitigation options, and then you have a good understanding that you can then communicate with your client on how these mitigation options are very, very crucial in your design solution. One of those really critical, we felt, aspects is occupancy. So previously, based on the assumptions you made about occupancy, for example, you could assume that people would be out during the day. That could mask a lot of the risk of overheating. So we felt that it was really important to include a 24-hour occupancy, because people actually live and work in their homes during the day. Young mothers with their kids, older people, it doesn't mean that they're going to leave their homes just because we said so. The other fundamental aspect that we included in the methodology is the use of future, let's call it future scenarios rather than observed weather pattern. So we thought, instead of using an observed last 30-year climate or weather profile, we introduced the use of 2020s, which is a 10 to 30 to 39 weather pattern. That gives you an understanding of how climate is at the moment, the weather you're designing at the moment, but also an indication of how things might get a bit warmer in the future. And the little graph shows you what is available. As a designer, you can use different scenarios, different probabilities, different future timelines for 14 UK locations to assess your vulnerability of your designs to climate change. Also very, very important is when you are actually introducing a mitigation option to make sure everybody in the design team understands that this is crucial in terms of dealing with overheating. It's not optional to have shading if that is part of your mitigation, of your design solution. Opening windows, it's good to assume that people will open windows, but there are various aspects, security, noise pollution, that actually will mean that people won't be able to open the windows. So as previously the speakers mentioned, this needs to be incorporated into the design. Having vulnerable residents, that gives you the responsibility of looking at their vulnerability, specific impact of hotter events to their physiology. And something that has been raised quite a lot recently is in block of flats you have the community heating pipes that are circulating hot water during the summer as well. That heat is trapped in the community, in the communal corridors if there isn't sufficient ventilation, which means it goes into the flats and reduces the capacity to cool. This is very, very quickly some tools that we also have available to try to represent what future climate projections are telling us, and this is available for 14 locations. It tells you the likelihood of certain changes in temperature happening in the 2020s, 50s, and 80s. It gives you that change for the low, medium, and high emission scenario. You can do comparisons between the scenarios in the 2020s. Tells you that there isn't really much difference between the emission scenarios, but as you go into the future, there's actually going to be a big difference if we adopt low emission future or high emission future. Now this might not work very well, but so the animation is a little bit off, but basically the idea is that what is the upper, the most change, temperature change, now it's, it's supposed to be medium in the 2050s and the lower, that should have been down on the blue bar. It just gives you an indication basically on how the projections are going to be in the future. We have a couple more that it's very quickly. We have a couple more publications that might be useful. This one is case study. So it's actually live buildings that have been designed based on the idea of adapting to climate change and looking at overheating now and in the future. And they found it very useful to discuss with clients the idea of phased adaptation. So perhaps now is not a problem, but in the 50s it might become more of a problem. So you allow for certain solutions to be incorporated in the future rather than install and design for it now. It's very practical guidance. All of that is free, by the way, to everybody. So you can just go into the CIBSE website and download it. And the final slide is for those that are overkeen, they want to know more about overheating. There's quite a lot of research that is out there for everybody to download and read. A lot on homes, but also hospitals, offices, now in the future, how it's going to affect energy demand, our health. There's so much out there. If you're interested, just Google it yeah. So yes, thank you very much.